exciting episode of Baseball Now. We've got a big show in store for you today with a lot of excitement, a lot of news, and a special surprise for all of y'all. For the first time in a long time, we have all of our cash and sports analysts. I'm here right now with our lead analyst, Thomas. Thomas, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure being back on the show.
Of course, I'm your host, Scott. Thomas, we had another very interesting week last week.
Yes, we did. We had a lot of ball games that were interesting. We had some runaway blowouts. We had some close ones until Sunday. I know your team was hanging around and then got squashed like a bug on Sunday. Just a lot of close ball games.
A lot of injuries.
Yes.
I noticed a lot of this week, a lot of paternity leaves.
Yep, and a lot of injuries. I know Corbin Carroll went down this week. He's getting the MRI. Yamamoto, my Japanese starting pitcher, that came from Japan, he's on the IL now with a triceps.
Verlander.
And Verlander's got a neck strain issue, which he'll be recovered by Thursday. And Verlander's also part of a package trade deal that'll be discussed here in a minute on the program.
But I've also noticed there's been a lot of paternity leaves. I noticed half my roster's been out for paternity leave.
Is that why you got beat?
Could be.
Maybe.
We've got a very interesting show for y'all this week, and we're going to go ahead and bring in the rest of our cash and sports analysts. Well, cash and sports analyst here. How about you introduce them?
All right, we got Ruben. He is the GM of the Atlanta Express, who is currently the top seed. And we've got the Demon Duck Lindsay's. That's Greg. He is second seed right now, but both these teams are at 9-3. So we got a couple of weeks to see if there's going to be a change in the seeding in the playoffs. So the Express leads at 1-0. So we'll see what's going to happen in a couple of weeks if these teams can survive their opponents this week and get to next week's top two showdown.
I believe they both got exciting segments on the show today that I look forward to.
And we have a couple of we have a new segment on the show. We've got a couple of them. The Express, Ruben and Greg, the Ducks. They got a segment on the show that they're going to be bringing to you here shortly.
Thank you, Thomas, for introducing to the rest of our cash and sports analyst and crew. So now we're going to take a time to go on over to our cash and sports Studio 43 and talk to Thomas for his weekly Rewind Recap, brought to you by Tammy Cakes.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at that Week 12 recap. The first game, we have the Georgia Dominators. That's myself at 462 points this week. Over the Gatlinburg Cubs at Scotty at 324 points. The Dominators moved to 7-5. The Cubs moved to 1-11 after they promised they would beat the Dominators this week. We've seen how that turned out on Sunday with a runaway. The next game we have on the list, the Demon Duck Lindsay's. That's Greg at 598. The Chili Dogs, that's Ken at 404. Greg moves to 9-3. Ken moves to 6-6. Ken will be featured on another Ken and Greg will be featured on another segment towards the later part of the show. A new special segment. The next game we've got Dan, just a little crazy, at 527. He moves to 7-5. And you've got the Warner Robin Bombers at 376. He moves to 2-10. And then the last game, which was an upset for this week after a humongous lead the first 3 days of this week, the Wildcats, that's Tammy, at 487. They moved to 7-5. And you have the Atlanta Express, Ruben, at 443, another week under 500. He moves to 9-3. Still top of the playoff seed, but we'll get to that a little bit later on in the program. So this week you had a lot of close ball games until the weekend. The Cubs and Dominators got really tight until yesterday's runaway. The Wildcats and Express was a runaway earlier this week until the Wildcats closed the gap and made a big run on Sunday to close out the upset win. And the Dan and the Bombers, that was a runaway game, just like the Demon Ducks and the Chili Dogs. That was a no contest game throughout the whole week. So that concludes the Week 12 recap.
Outlook from last week in that weekly rewind. We appreciate it as always. Now we're going to head on over to our Cash and Sports newsroom for a little bit of breaking trade news of our trade expert, analyst Greg Lindsay. Greg, what do you got for us today, buddy?
Good afternoon, folks. Breaking news today. We have a trade went down yesterday between the Cubs and the Dominators. And it's an interesting trade. We'll go ahead and tell who it is. The Dominators pick up Chris Sale, Julio Rodriguez, and Alex Bergman, which is a good pickup for their team. And we move on to the Cubs, who get Juan Soto, one of the top players, Justin Verlander, and also they get a reliever, Josh Hader, who's one of the top relievers in the game. It's a very interesting trade. It looks like it might help both teams in the long run. But there's no other trades right now pending. But there could be. We do have a deadline, I believe it's July 30th or 31st. So, but that's all for the trades right now.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for that breaking news. You're right. I do believe that trade's going to help both sides, the Dominators and the Cubs. So now we're going to head back on over to our studio where we're going to have Ruben with his look ahead for this week. Ruben, what do you see for this week, buddy?
Hello, folks. How are you today? Well, this week I will have the week in preview for you, the week ahead. First off, we're going to have the Dominators. That's Thomas and Dan, just a little crazy. That's going to be a good matchup. Them two usually have a good rivalry going on, and they usually have good battles. Next, you have Greg with the Demon Ducks at 9-3, taking on Jackson's Warner Robin Bombers at a staggering 2-10 so far for the season. We can only hope that Jackson can get it together and pick together some wins before the season is over with. And then coming in third, we have my team, the Atlanta Express, at 9-3. We're going on up against Ken's Chili Dogs. Now that's going to be a tough match for us. Coming off a loss from last week to Tammy's Wildcats and going in against a very formidable team in the Chili Dogs. They've proven themselves to be very competitive, so that's going to be a hard game for us. And then we're going to have the Cubs versus the Wildcats. Cubs at 1-11 versus the Wildcats at 7-5. Tammy's team is, I've said it all along this year. She was one of the teams to beat, for the playoffs, getting towards the end of the season, going into the playoffs. My pick for the game of the week this week is probably going to be the Dominators, which is Thomas, against Dan's Just a Little Crazy, because those two teams they've been at each other since the fantasy baseball series started. That rivalry goes back all the way to the first season. So I don't know what the numbers are on the win-loss record between those two teams, but it's always a tough It's always a tough battle. They battled for the championships. They've battled, through every season. It's always a good week to watch it when them two go at it. As far as the Express goes this week, we had to rebound from, we need to try and rebound from our loss this week to the Wildcats, and coming up next week, we need to try to do what it takes to put the Chili Dogs in the rear view for us, and just go from there and see how it works out. But that pretty much wraps up my week ahead.
For that outstanding outlook at the week ahead. Now we're going to talk to Thomas again, bring him back on the show and talk to him, who is going to be in our scientific cash and sports lab, where he's going to have your playoff preview. It's getting that time of the season again where the playoffs are starting to come around, come to buzz with a preview. So we're going to head on over to the lab and see what Thomas is making up for tonight.
All right, let's take a look at the playoff preview and percentages. So far, the first seed in the playoff, you got the Atlanta Express, that's Ruben. The second seed, you've got the Demon Ducks. They're both at the same record, but right now, the Express hold the tiebreaker over the Ducks via head-to-head. The third seed, you've got Just a Little Crazy, who holds a tiebreaker over the Wildcats, who's in fourth, via head-to-head. You've got the Dominators at number 5. Just a little crazy, the Wildcats and the Dominators all have the same record at 7-5, but there's some tiebreaker issues for the Dominators as they've lost both their matchups to Dan and Tammy. No, excuse me, they're 1-1 against Tammy, but they lose the points for battle, that tiebreaker. So then you have Ken that is out of game, and he's out of game, so he's no tiebreaker for him yet. And so there's your seeds as they run right now. The playoff matchups, if the season were to end today, you would have the Atlanta Express against the Wildcats, which was just played out on week 12, where the Wildcats were victorious over the Express. And then you would have the Demon Ducks versus Just a Little Crazy. And I believe that series is tied at 1 apiece. And or it may be 2-0. I'm not really sure on that. But that's your playoff matchups right now if the season were to end today. And ESPN has got a little playoff percentage. So right now the Express are at 93% likely to make the playoffs. The Demon Ducks are at 92% likely to make the playoffs. Just a Little Crazy's at 60% likely to make the playoffs. The Wildcats and the Dominators are both tied at 63% to make the playoffs. And the Chili Dogs are at 30%. And that has been your playoff preview. All right, folks, we are joined here, a bonus part of the program. We are joined here by the GM of the Wildcats, Tammy. Welcome for being on. Thank you for being on the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. I'm well.
So this week you were down by over 100 points against Reuben the Express, and you end up miraculously on Saturday and Sunday closing that gap and coming back and beating him by 40 on Sunday. So how does that feel, beating him?
That was a very nice victory. Well earned for my team.
Is that the last victory for the year?
No, it's not. That's just us getting back started for our second part of the season.
Any kind of free agent moves, waiver pickups, or trades that you got in the works?
I'm looking for some replacements because I had some of my people got injured in yesterday's game, so I'm looking for a second baseman and a catcher.
All right, folks, she just put that out there. She's looking for a second baseman and a catcher. She just had Mookie Betts go down yesterday with a fractured hand. So he's gonna be out for a while. So that's gonna be a punch out of her lineup. So looking forward this week, you've got your son, the Gatlinburg Cubs, going against you. They just won a couple of weeks ago. They said they were going to beat the Dominators last week and failed miserably. So is this a letdown game for you against the Gatlinburg Cubs?
No, it'll just be like a spring training practice game.
That's
just
interesting.
Just to get in there to practice.
That's interesting. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for giving us your time. And go Dominators.
Go Wildcats.
Let's go ahead and go back to you while you are in the kitchen with our Who's Hot, Who's Not segment for the last week.
All right, let's take a look at our news segment that's been featured last week. Who's hot and who is not hot? On the Who's Hot, you've got the Demon Duck Lindsay's. That's Greg. He's won 5 in a row, and I believe that is tied with the Express for the win streak, the longest win streak so far this year. Also, they've won 2 in a row. The Wildcats, Tammy's team, they've won 2 in a row. They're also hot. And they could stay hotter this week with a win over the Gatlinburg Cubs, or they could go back down and get ice thrown on their team and start being cold again. On the Who's Not, we've got the father-son duo. We've got the Warner Robin Bombers, Jackson, who's lost 4 in a row. And now we have Ken with the Macon Chili Dogs that's dropped 3 in a row. He was interesting this so far. He was up, he was down a little bit. Then he came on fire as high as number 2 in the power rankings. And now he's kind of sliding back on down again. He's now a game out of the playoffs, which we'll get to in just a minute. That's pretty much our segment on who's hot and who's not.
folks. I'm your host, Scott, and I'm here in the Cash and Sports field. While we take a look at the weekly power rankings from the commissioner. Big changes this week in our power rankings. We have a new number one. Leading off this week in the number one spot for the first time this year, we have the Demon Ducks. Greg Lindsay at 9-3. Falling in the number two slot, we have the Atlanta Express, who is also 9-3. So those two teams have caught back up with each other. It'll be interesting to see how next week or two folds. Dropping to number three, we have the Just a Little Crazy at 7-5. We have the Wildcats, who's coming in at number 4 at 7-5. The Dominators coming in at number 5, who's 7-5. Then we go down to the 6-6 Macon Chili Dogs, who's starting to cool off a little bit, as per told in Thomas's Who's Hot, Who's Not segment. Then we got the Gatlinburg Cubs coming in at 1-11, and the Warner Robin Bombers coming in at 2-10. Another interesting week for the power rankings. Let me remind you, the power rankings are done by head-to-head matchup, points, and the win-loss record. So there is your commissioner's power rankings for week 13.
Thank you, folks, for letting us come into your cell phone, your TV, and any kind of screen or audio that you have for us. We appreciate it. I'm Thomas. This is Scott. Greg. This is Ruben. We thank you, and have a great rest of your week.
Be sure to like and follow Cash and Sports on Facebook and YouTube for more great episodes of Baseball Now and the Bullpen on Thursdays. And look forward to our fantasy football season that'll be starting here not too far from now. I know we got a couple of good shows coming up for that this year. And make sure you like and follow us on Facebook under Cash and Sports and East Tennessee Media. For your host, Scott, and the rest of the Cash and Sports crew, everybody have a great night.
This has been a production of Cash and Sports, a division of East Tennessee Media.